Doubt that. But let's start at the beginning. What was the genesis of, or how did you get involved in the investment business?
Easy, completely accidental. I went to Harvard Business School because the girl that I was dating said, you should go to the B school. I said, sorry, but what do you mean? The business school. I said, you say the business school. What could that be? She said, the Harvard Business School. So she was terrific, so I decided to do what she suggested. When I was at the Harvard Business School, they didn't have any courses on investment management, so there's no way that I could get a basic education in the field. And a friend of mine said that Rockefellers are looking for someone to come and work with them, and I thought he meant the Rockefeller Foundation. And I thought, that's interesting. I've never thought of doing work in the philanthropic field, but could be a terrific place. So I agreed to meet with the fellow who was looking for someone to come. And after half an hour, I realized he's not talking about giving money away. He's talking about something else. But you know, this man is brilliant, lovely person, and you could learn a lot. And candidly, Charlie, you need to learn a lot. You better figure out what he's talking about. So the next half hour, fortunately, he explained what the job was all about, which was working in the family office for the Rockefeller family and the several foundations and endowments that they had created. So it was an ideal place to work, particularly because there were only 7 of us in the office. And since I knew nothing and the other guys knew a lot, I had a perfectly marvelous opportunity. So I lucked into it.
Fantastic. So I know you asked me not to put you on a pedestal. I'm not going to, but it's undeniable that you've evolved into somewhat of a thought leader in the investment world. How did that come to be?
Accidental.
You gonna give me a little more than that?
Well, if you start out knowing nothing, it's not too hard to figure out where you are. And so I said, well, I got some help, but I knew I needed to learn something. The help I got was from my immediate supervisor at the Rockefeller family office. I had been assigned to do a study of the textile industry.
You said
textiles. And in that era, early 1960s, it was an exciting place for long-term investment. Turned out to be a terrible place for long-term investment, and most of the companies in the textile business went either bankrupt or got acquired at a very low price, and it was a disaster. But at the time, we all thought it was pretty darn interesting. So I got all the Wall Street reports that I could and analyzed them very, very carefully and did a 7-page written analysis where I spelled everything correctly, always started each paragraph with a topic sentence. Then I had some numbers and some words, and I turned it in. And my immediate supervisor called me over to his office and said, Charlie, didn't you learn nothing at the Harvard Business School on how to do investing? And I said, no, Phil, they didn't actually have any courses, so there wasn't an opportunity. He said, well, let me tell you, this is a rich family, but they're not rich enough to have you working here. So you're going to NYU, and you're going to start taking some courses, and I've arranged for you to get into a training program at one of the Wall Street firms. You got a lot to learn, fella. You got a lot to learn. So once I got started at learning, I realized this is really interesting, and it's fun, and you can actually use it. And I thought that was thrilling. Since my undergraduate major was art history, which is a field that a few people graduating in art history can use it because they go into museum work. The rest of us have no way of using it whatsoever except for our own personal enjoyment and the privilege of seeing truly beautiful paintings on the walls of organized museums.
So you use the word disaster, and you've indicated that some of the most transformative periods in your life have been as a consequence of disasters. Could you actually pinpoint the most educational disasters or educational mistakes that you've experienced?
In public?
Whatever you're willing to divulge.
Well, I think the biggest and best learning experience I ever had, which is relatively easy to share with you individually, may be hard to share with you collectively.
We're all family
without
here.
bursting into tears. 15 years ago, by which time you would have thought I'd learned something, a really smart guy who happened to be a classmate in college, and I knew was smart, and had spent his career in venture investing, invited me to join with him as a partner in his investing. And I thought, boy, life comes to you in very unusual moments. And I had a couple of very positive experiences by then. And I thought, maybe this is the right thing for me to do. So I allocated 10% to doing what I thought would be like Tabasco sauce. It'll brighten up and sparkle, make things really interesting. That was a terrible misjudgment. I could have done a little bit of things like Googling, find out what's the written record. I didn't. I went right into it, assuming that because we were classmates and because he had treated me with such thoughtful respect and interest, and I was stepping right in to what was basically a Bernie Madoff experience. This was not with Madoff. There was a guy named Eli Jacobs, who, if any of you have met him, you would know better than I did at the time, don't ever do anything with him. I did. And it's been one miserable consequence after another. Fortunately, it was limited to a small amount, but it was dumb in the process. I don't mind having a bad outcome. When Cliff was talking about risk, yeah, you have terrible outcomes, but if it's part of a deliberate program, which you know what you're doing, and you're going to be doing it over a long period of time, and you're going to get time diversification as well as experience diversification, you can do things that work out very badly individually without being embarrassed about it. In fact, that's one of the costs of taking the risks that lead to higher returns. Okay. This is not one of those things where it's a part of a systematic, thoughtful, wise, balanced program. This was a one-off, and I should have done lots of extra homework. And I made the mistake, which I associate with arrogance, of being more confident that my judgment on the individual would be right. And I decided on that basis alone. It was a terrible mistake.
And I mean, you use the word systematic. Is there an overarching investment philosophy that you have or that you live by?
Sure. It's in parts. Number one, on selecting an investment manager, the only thing that really matters is the only thing that really matters for those of you who are parents of children who are in the thought process of maybe getting married, and you meet the alternative, the other person who might be part of a happily married couple. You don't care what color their eyes are, you don't care whether they're cute, you don't care whether they tell fun jokes, you don't care whether they dance really well. Honestly, you don't care about a lot of things. What you care a lot about is this guy, being a father, is this guy going to be a good friend, a truly trustworthy friend to my daughter 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now. You really care about character. And in investment management, selection of investment managers, I personally believe that's the only thing anybody who is not deeply involved in full-time involvement in investment management has a chance of understanding, and it is the most important single thing. So if I were choosing an investment manager, everything would have to do with the selection on character, which is usually what I've done. But this one horrible time, I thought I was too smart to get involved in doing,
Are there any beliefs that you carry that are maybe deeply contrarian or opposite common sentiment, something that other people might disagree with you on?
Well, Cliff certainly would disagree with me on, I believe that the time, first of all, we got a semantic problem, but the time has come for most people, and I mean almost all people, to use indexing instead of using high-priced, custom-tailored, so-called active investing. Indexing just takes, there are two big parts to any investment management program worth a damn. One is operations, and one is policy. And the nice thing about indexing is it takes all the time and effort that used to be put into trying to figure out the operations part, put that aside, and let you concentrate entirely on what really, really matters, which is policy, long-term program, what are your capacities to live with and live through without flinching risk and risky situations? What is your ability to, how much time do you have? At my age, I'm 80, so you'd ask, well, Charlie, why are you 100% invested in equities? Easy to understand. I'm not investing for me. I'm investing for grandchildren. And they get plenty of time on their hands. I don't have much time. So if you looked at my age group, you'd say you should be heavily involved in bonds. I think that's ridiculous. I can earn enough to be able to get along. My wife's very generous, and she works too, so we're okay on covering the need for current. But the long term, those kids, there are 4 of them, they average 10 years of age, and they come to the world with full tilt, and they want us to be paying attention to them. So I'd like them to get good education and a chance to get started in their careers in a way that's really quite well. I like Warren Buffett's, enough so you can choose to do what you really want to do, but not enough so you don't have to make a choice. I like that concept, and I'm very clearly there.
Fantastic. So, one of the things that I really enjoy about this forum is that virtually every speaker that we have references another speaker that we had during the same day. And even on the calls that I have with yourself, and when I was speaking to Mario Gabelli, he's going to say, I'm going to say everything opposite Charley Ellis. I love the guy, but I'm going to have very different views. It's very refreshing.
Well, I'd be willing to be opposite Mario on everything. I think the world of him as a human being. I just think what he's doing is very hard for most other people to think they know how to do it too.
Absolutely. No, so I love the confluence of ideas. Where do you personally see, given your preference for indexation and passive investing, where do you see the...
No, wait. Let's get clear. Passive is a horrible term. Just like, raise a hand, please. Who here would like to be introduced by his or her spouses? This is my wife or husband. He or she is passive. It's got a negative connotation. In electrical engineering, it does not have a negative connotation. It's a plug into which you put an active plug. That's all. It's just a receptacle for a plug. They didn't mean to be offensive. And then we all of a sudden use the word in a way that should never be used.
So thank you for clarifying. So where do you see the investment, however you term it, where do you see the investment industry and the asset management industry heading? And at what point is it too far?
Well, we're going to speak about the total group, and there are exceptions. And Cliff would quickly put his hand up. I think that we are exceptions. Nice compliment to him is modesty, personally, but he and his group are some of the smartest people I've ever spent time with, and I have had the privilege of doing consulting with that firm. I spent a couple of days working quite closely with them. They are filled with unbelievably talented, very disciplined, very hardworking people, got data feeds the likes of which the White House Situation Room would be thrilled to have. So that's the competition. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that there are people who are doing things that are different. Jim Simons, with not quite but almost 100 math PhDs, is doing things in and around the market. The rest of us would have no idea what they're doing, no idea why it's interesting, but over time they've been able to produce a very nice return. I believe there are exceptions, but the exceptions honestly prove the rule. And the reason indexing makes so much sense is partly history. If you go back to when I came out of Harvard Business School, first of all, there were no courses. Now there's 7 different courses at Harvard Business School on investment management. That's a big change. If you go back to early 60s, there were no CFAs. Now there's CFAs all over the place. I think it's 120,000, and there's 250,000 in the waiting list queued up to take those dreadful exams. And a lot of them are in China, a lot of them are in India, but the world has gotten out to bright young people all over the world. Get your CFA. That's a correct piece of advice, but it does indicate how many people are going to be really quite talented and skilled and have done a lot of homework. If you think of Mike Bloomberg with his wonderful machine, I remember the worst, you didn't ask me, so but I'll drop it in just as a defensive move because I might as well volunteer it. What's the worst advice you ever gave anybody? It's me talking to Mike Bloomberg. Mike and I had gotten to know each other pretty well when he was doing the block trading business at Salomon Brothers. And he was good at using data to make decisions, and I had good data, and we had a natural coming together. Easy. We also happened to hit it off on a personal level, which was great fun. One of the thrills of my life personally was the night of the election for mayor, when the first time he ran, My wife and I were having a dinner party in New York, and we had invited Mike because he's such a terrific guy. He actually came. That shows what a calm, easygoing kind of person. So Salomon Brothers was acquired by Fibro, and all of a sudden, Mike has got $12 million. And I'm sitting talking with him, and I said, Mike, geez, you've got the toughest question anybody's ever had. You're smart, you're good looking, you know a lot, you got plenty of money. What are you going to do? You've got years ahead of you. This is going to be one of the great moments of anybody's life. We'd all love to be right where you are. What are you going to do? He said, yeah, I don't know. I've been sort of thinking, last year or so I've been doing a lot of stuff in the back office. I got to see if I can do something in the area of computing. Jesus, Mike, don't do it. Fortunately, he went right ahead and did it. But there were no Bloomberg machines. Now, there are 250,000 Bloombergs. Everybody's got a Bloomberg. There are people who got them at home, people who got them at work. There are people who have them in their cars. They drive from home to work because they don't want to be out of touch. That means everybody knows everything anytime they want to. Federal governments around the world are following along with the same policy the U.S. SEC has. Any publicly owned company that gives any information that could be useful, even on a mosaic theory, to an investment manager must be sure that everyone gets that same information at the same time. Hey, come on, that was the secret sauce of investing, is go get some proprietary information and use it. It's over. It's a commodity. Everybody's got it. And through their Bloombergs, they can access it anytime they want to. So it got all kinds of different things. It used to be, back in the early 60s, there might have been, it's a ballpark guess, but might have been 5,000 people who said, I'm involved in active investment management. Some of them portfolio managers, some of them analysts, a lot of different things. Today, easily 1 million people worldwide are actively involved in active investment management. Now, what does that mean? Well, a whole bunch of different things. First, back in the old dark days, less than 10% of trading was done by quote-unquote institutions, mostly regional bank trust departments that bought blue chip stocks with good dividends, so there's a capital interest and the income interest were balanced. Laddered maturities on bonds, and your major priority in stock investing was to be able to hold forever so there would be no capital gains tax. Think what they bought. Sure, blue chip stocks, monthly meetings of the committee. During the month, the administrative officers of the trust department could put them into various portfolios and stuff. That was what's called professional. 90+% were done by individuals. Who were those individuals? Well, first of all, they did a trade every year or two. They usually did their trades in odd lots, and half of all their buying was AT&T. That was the competition? Yes, that was the competition. We were ready to go. What's the competition today? First of all, we're going to leave out derivatives, which are larger in volume of information and transactions value than the cash market. Leave that aside. Just look at the cash market. It's gone from less than 10% to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 to 60 to 70 to 80 to 90, 95, 97, 98, and it's somewhere around 99% of the trading is done by experts, full-time professional experts. How good are they? I think they're absolutely fabulous. You saw Cliff, you listened to the way he thinks. He's one of that crowd. Top end of the crowd, but that's who he is. 99%. Gee, who do they buy from? Each other. Who do they sell to? Each other. If they're buying from each other and selling to each other, and everybody knows all the same information, and everybody's been to the same graduate schools, and everybody has the same computing power, and everybody knows the same disciplines, and everybody has access to a Bloomberg, and everybody has equal this, equal that, equal this and that, how the hell are you going to beat the other guy? Not to worry. We've had 3 years. They're terrific, and we're being introduced to. Take a longer time horizon. How bad is it? Pretty bad. If you take the mutual fund world and look at how many funds outperform the benchmark they chose as the one they would like to beat. And they got all the time in the world to organize to be able to beat that plain vanilla benchmark. How are they doing? Not too well. Well, what do you mean? Well, in a typical single year, somewhere between 60 and 70% fall short of the benchmark. Year's too short, Charlie. Give me a longer time period. Fine. In 10 years, you're looking at roughly 75, 80% fall short. Well, it's been a tough 10 years. How about longer? Well, actually, I meant 10 years all the way back, but let's go ahead and make it longer. 20 years, it rises to 93, 4, 5%. Well, the US is just one market. How about the UK? It's worse. I do not have the data in Canada, but given the fees that are charged in Canada, my guess is that it's probably pretty bad there too. So here you've got an opportunity where people who are pretty darn good at the work and are being paid very, very well. It is the best paid line of work in the world. Paid pretty well, and they can't actually succeed. Is that a good idea to be doing that? Imagine just for a moment the counterfactual. Let's assume we were all indexers, and somebody came along and said, hey, have I got good news for you guys? You can have a custom-tailored portfolio management where you won't know what they're doing in terms of risk-taking, but you do know it can vary quite a lot. You will see that the performance over any long-term period is 3, 4, 5 to 1 negative. When it's negative, it's much more negative, 2 to 3 times more negative than it's positive when it is positive. So slugging average, it's even worse than it looks. And you're going to be paying a really interesting fee. What is the fee? Oh, I thought it was only 1%. Wait a minute. Only 1%. 1% of what? 1% of the assets. Yeah, but those are already my assets. So what's the manager doing for me? He's getting your returns, Charlie. Okay. So what's the fee as a percentage of returns? Well, returns looks like 6, 7% might be reasonable expectation in the next 10 years. Ooh, that doesn't look like very good. Hey, remember, we've gotten to a pretty high price level when we're starting point. So 1% of assets is what percent of returns? Well, 15, 20%. Well, that deletes the 4-letter word only, because that's starting to get to be a pretty big fee. Then you say, well, let's do one more comparison. You can get the commodity product called indexing for 1/20th of what you're paying for active custom-tailored investing. So you're paying 20 times more. What more do you get? Well, you get more risk, you get more uncertainty, you get a lower return, and that's what you get.
So let me ask you something. So
why would anybody say, God damn, I'm so glad to hear that. I'm getting out of indexing right away.
So one of the things you mentioned was if all of us were indexing. Now, I think that, Cliff mentioned it, and I suspect you would agree that it's virtually impossible for everybody to be indexing. Is that correct? Would you agree with that?
I agree with that.
Okay, so given the fact that there is going to be a very active component to the market, what does it take for somebody to succeed in that environment? Because we're going to need them. They're going to be there. It's the reality. So how?
You mean how can somebody be successful as an active manager?
Number one, and secondly, how do you actually find them? How do you choose them?
Well, let's start with how does someone succeed as an active manager? First, stop thinking in terms of doing better than the market, risk-adjusted over a long period of time, or the client's interest. Concentrate with me just for a moment on the possibility. I got my PhD in economics, so I really start to believe in economics, and I particularly believe in behavioral economics. What do you really think will drive people? Let's see, it's the highest paid line of work in the world. It's indoor work. You don't have to stop at 35 as a commercial paper salesman might, or at 45 as an investment banker might, or at 65 as a corporate executive might. You can actually work until 75, 80, 85. I've got a couple of friends who made it past 100, still putting in 5-day weeks because they're having so damn much fun. Oh, that's right. It's also the most fun line of work there's ever been. The only real problem you have is the food is so good you have to watch your weight all the time. And The people are so interesting that you have to be careful to concentrate a little bit on the work that you're doing, because it's the greatest group of people you'll ever find anywhere. They're all really smart, articulate, fun to be with. They've got interesting stories, and they know so damn much. It's just really incredible.
So I just come back to the question. If there are, of those fine people who are enjoying all that food, there's got to be some that you've identified that are able to, first of all, they have to exist because for price discovery and all sorts of other reasons, but how do you succeed in the environment in which you describe? How does somebody succeed? How does somebody identify? Notwithstanding that they may be a fraction of the market.
Oh, it's easy. Yeah, success is easy. All you have to do is know more than the other people, be skilled at acting faster than the other people, and have a concept that is profound and not known by the other people. And oh, by the way, it's really important to stay modest because you don't want to get a lot of money to manage, because small amounts of money are much easier to manage than large amounts of money. And so you have to watch out for people saying, Charlie, we've all got careers here. You've got a nice career because you're at the top of the firm. The rest of us need to have the firm get bigger so we've got more opportunity. You got to give us a break. So let's get a little bit bigger. We'll take it on. We can handle it. It'll work out fine. The dreadful part of investment management, it's really sad. With all the wonderful qualitative characteristics, this enormous drive to take on just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. We can handle it. And if you look, what are the advantages of being 80 years old? Very few. Number one is on the subway, men and women will stand up and say, sir, would you like to sit down? Boy, does that make you feel great all over. There are very few, but one of them is that you've been around long enough to realize that there's something to be said for looking at the facts. Look at the data, look at the record. And the second is to recognize that things change. People get offended in the investment management field because you say indexing makes a lot of sense. Listen, I was a Morse code intercept operator so damn good that I could take 23 word groups a minute with pom-poms and could tune into anybody who was sending, and I could figure out what they were doing. And I had a top secret cryptographic clearance, which was required in order to do the highly skilled work I was doing.
This is your time in the military.
Yeah. But what it is today, it's the size of a pack of cigarettes with a D-ring. You pull the D-ring out, used to be as big as a telephone booth. You pull the D-ring out and hook it on the link, and it prints out on heat-sensitive tape what's being sent. So I've been technologically obsolescent. I know what it's like to have your feelings hurt. Well, the nice thing about Boy Scouts is you can use the fact you know the Morse code to impress the kids. Yeah. And other than that, completely. So people are going to resist being made obsolete. Fine. Second is nobody who's being paid sensationally well is going to want to do something else instead. Third, anybody who's having a really great time with the people they're hanging out with is not going to want to give that up. And these are all additives. It's not all of these things come with it. Why would anybody give up? And you might, hey, by the way, you might actually succeed. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the other thing which you've got to remember is for anybody in the investment management world, there's side opportunities, little things that are not really right for your clients, but you could do. So there's different ways of making money on the side that are pretty damn interesting. And if you don't have to be dumb, you just pay slight attention. Don't do a lot, but just slight attention. And you'll see 2 or 3 of these things happen over a lifetime, 5 or 10 if you're lucky, really lucky, but they can help too. So why would anybody give that up? They're going to stay with it. Where I think you're going is, is the question you asked Cliff, when do we have too much indexing and therefore we should all get back into active investing? First of all, it will not be a black-white light switch decision. It will be a gradual. Second, if you believe, as I do, that smoking does have a high probability of causing cancer, my mother died of lung cancer, she was a heavy smoker, I believe there's a connection. The data that has been turned out by scientists is terrific. So what's going on? Teenage kids, usually girls, are smoking again in increasing numbers. It says on the pack, cigarette smoking will cause death. These kids, they're going to live forever. So be careful. We unlearn almost as fast as we affirmatively learn. But as indexing gets to be more and more, where is it going to start to open up opportunities that be really attractive? I think that's the wrong question. Somewhat better, but still wrong question is, when will trading be so dominated by indexing that it's not attractive? The key question will be, and the only question that really matters, is when will enough people who are now proficient in investment management and have gotten used to doing that kind of work and enjoy it, and enjoy the compensation, and enjoy the privilege of friendships, and the fascination of it's an ever-changing game, it's the most interesting game that adults can play anywhere in the world. When will such large numbers of those talented people say, Charlie, I've thought about this a lot, and I've decided I'm going to stop, I'm going to go into law, or medicine, or corporate management, or something that's not part of this exciting game. When that happens in large numbers, and we drift from 1 million down to 200,000, 100,000, somewhere in there, then I would think it would be very interesting to think seriously about getting into investment management on an active basis once again. In the meantime, anybody with his head screwed on knows that there are two parts, as I was saying at the very, very beginning. One part is operations, and one part is strategy or policy, long-term, short-term, long-term, very short-term, very long-term. You perfect how to do the short-term operational side, you've only begun to privilege yourself by having time enough to concentrate on the really important things that have all to do with who you are, what's your financial situation, what are your responsibilities and obligations, what's your own knowledge base, what's your attitude towards riskiness and risk, and how much interest do you have in investment management as a general question. Those characteristics differentiate every one of us from every other person. And that's where the really valuable work can be done. Because if you get it right, at the highest level of risk-taking that you can feel comfortable with, and hang in there for the long term. And as Cliff said, there's a lot of terrible experiences that go for not just 2 or 3 days, but 2, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. They're long terms.
Absolutely. So if I could change gears a little bit, because we still have lots of questions and very little time. You worked very closely with Yale's David Swensen, correct?
I do.
Okay, so you still do. So just for everybody's benefit, David Swensen is Yale's legendary chief investment officer, along whom Charlie chaired the investment committee for 9 years, I believe.
9 years chair,
Nice.
17 years total.
Okay, so it's quite a bit. But if my data is correct, during that time, David's efforts at Yale, coupled with Charlie's, contributed to about a 12% annualized return over a 30-year period. Is that accurate?
Yep.
12% over a 30-year period. Remarkable. So just given those extraordinary numbers and how closely you work with them, what do you think is the most important factor in the highly visible long-term success that Yale and David Swensen, I guess with your help, achieved?
Everybody looks at the returns, which are wonderful. But that's not nearly as important as what nobody pays any attention to, and that's the risk management. And risk management is where David and his team have been far and away concentrated and where they've had their greatest successes. But since nobody measures it, nobody talks about it, it's silent. But it's a little bit like the secret to happy marriages usually is not the highly visible, but rather the not highly visible but terribly important things. Risk management and the ability to rigorously think through rationally, and I emphasize the word rationally, what would be for the long term, and Yale's been around for a little over 300 years, so long term tends to be pretty long term. What would be the rational policy to defend against risk and have opportunity for longer term returns for such a portfolio? So structural diversification, individual manager diversification, superb access to scuttlebutt information, the likes of which nobody's ever had before. I mean, David's organization is an information cauldron. It's just amazing how much information they have and how rigorously they work to use that information carefully and well. Those characteristics really matter, and they're almost all about how to do the same things that I was advocating as the long-term over here part. It's very, I mean, yes, they do manage a government bond portfolio, but it's tiny and it's just for liquidity. All the rest of investment is done by other organizations, and selectivity of those managers, which years ago, 20, 25, 30 years ago, was relatively high contributor by the managers. It's gone down to its best estimate, something like 1/4% increment. That's a nice increment, but it's nothing like 1 or 2 or 3%.
Right.
And the avoidance of mistakes avoidance of trouble is overwhelmingly the most important part.
If you were to restart your career today, or your investing career, I should say, because you might have gone into the art side, but if you were to restart your investing career today, what would you be doing?
Honestly,
and what would you have done differently, maybe is a better question.
We're all creatures of the circumstance. First of all, I was lucky, unbelievably lucky. I got into active investment management at the very early stages. Most people were still plodding along doing the old traditional 1930s depression, 1940s Second World War, 1950s Cold War. Be careful, don't do anything interesting. And all we had to do is to look for the most interesting things. So it wasn't all that hard. Gradually, it got to be more and more research available, more and more trading liquidity, more and more information, faster and faster computers, all kinds of wonderful things. And we didn't realize that it was transforming investment management of the kind that we had done in the 60s and 70s from being, this is easy, this is like stealing candy from children. This is getting harder and harder because we have to steal from each other and we have to do better than the others who are just like us in so many ways. So, I would never have gone into investment management today on the operational side. It's also true, my father-in-law is probably as good a pilot as the world has ever seen. I'm sure there were other really great pilots too, but just imagine, he was the so-called bald eagle, which is in the US Navy Air. It's the oldest active flyer. So he'd been in it for a long time. He set a record for the most dangerous thing I can imagine. An F-4 is a heavy fighter bomber. When it comes into an aircraft carrier, it's going 450 miles an hour. There's a wire. You either catch the wire or you're flame out. Aircraft carrier may look really big when you're standing on the deck in harbor, but I have to tell you, when you're in the open ocean, it looks pretty small. And when you're in an airplane and you're supposed to land on the damn thing, you know it's really small. When you're in an airplane and it's night and you're going to land, it's tiny. And my father-in-law set a world record that'll never be touched because they don't let pilots fly as much these days as they used to because it costs so damn much to repair the machines and stuff like that. He set a record for at sea, at night, carrier landings. In my opinion, that is the most terrifying thing I can imagine. Friends of mine who've been in the Navy say every year of 100 pilots, 1, 2, or 3 will get killed. They're all perfect. They're all trained. They all have the same equipment. But 1, 2, or 3 will get killed. So I figured that's super dangerous stuff. Interesting thing, I fly more than my father-in-law flew. I fly all the time. I just flew in from Rome on Air Canada. We had a perfect takeoff. We had a perfect landing. And I had nothing to do with it except to sit in my assigned seat. And I believe that's as close to indexing as anybody will come to. I had to decide. I had to decide when I wanted to leave, which day, and roughly what time. I had to decide where I wanted to go. I had to be there an hour and a half before flight time. I had to sit in my assigned seat. When the light went on, I had to buckle my seatbelt. I had a lot of important things to do. But somebody else was flying the plane. And when I hit the light switch in my hotel room this morning, somebody else had done all the wiring. All I had to do was decide I wanted the lights on. And the same kind of lesson could be applied, in my opinion, should be applied to investing. It used to be really exciting and fun and useful to be an active investor. Now it's still exciting and fun, but it's not useful to be an active investor. And it guarantees that you will have an underperforming long-term experience. Plus a lot of grief and anguish, and your wife or husband turns and says, "Why the hell did you do that? I didn't do it, it was done for me. Oh, you should never have chosen those guys," so on and so on. There are lots of different problems with quote-unquote active investing. If we ever drop the word passive and use something like smart or savvy, we'd be in a liftoff that would be simply terrific. And I have fingers crossed that more and more people would realize in the investment management world, the guys who are making all the money are not the clients.
Charlie, that was fantastic. We're all out of time, but thank you so much for flying up from Rome to visit us. Really appreciate it.
Great fun.
Really, thank you. And we have a small token of our appreciation. This was commissioned for you. And
Oh, wonderful.
a donation has been given to sick kids in your honor.
This would be great because my wife still doesn't know that I'm learning how to do fly fishing. And John Sinclair has done a very nice job for me, giving me my first lessons in how to do fly fishing. I'm going to earn this.
She'll find out tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. That was terrific.